commenced the Roundtable on Human Rights in India. I'm David Shoebridge, one of the Greens MPs in the New South Wales Parliament here in Sydney, Australia. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that the land that this Parliament is on and the participants of the forum who are contributing from this land, we're on First Nations land. This is Gadigal land, Aboriginal land, and we pay our collective respects to those elders past, present and emerging of the land upon which this institution is based. And indeed, as a member of the New South Wales Parliament, I think it's important to acknowledge that the institution that I'm a part of has been a significant part of the dispossession and violence against First Nations peoples within this part of Australia. And I commit, and I hope we commit collectively to providing justice for First Nations peoples, whether it's on Gadigal land or across the rest of the globe. I'd like to welcome everybody to this human rights panel. This began through a dialogue with some of the justice advocates that we have, that my office works with here in Sydney, but across Australia. And one of the consistent themes and concerns that has arisen in that discussion is the state of human rights in India at the moment. We are very fortunate to have an extremely distinguished panel, three extremely distinguished panels of contributors from across the globe. And I think the fact that there's been such interest from such distinguished panelists from across the globe to this Human Rights Forum makes it clear that this is a necessary part of the discussion that we should be having if you care about human rights, whether you're in Chicago, Los Angeles, New Delhi, or Sydney. And indeed, with the increasing role that many countries see for their relations with India, and I'd say especially with Australia, we have seen a conscious pivot towards a stronger relationship with India in the last few years. Many people see that in a geopolitical context where there have been increasing concerns, security concerns about relationships with China. The constructive role which parliamentarians, human rights activists and lawyers can play in standing up for and advocating for human rights, not just in their own places, but also in India, I think is one of the reasons why we've seen such strong take up for this panel today. We have three panels, first commencing at 1:20 p.m, discussing the state of play for human rights in India. We have contributors, 4 contributors to that panel. I'll introduce them at the commencement of that panel. Our second panel will commence at 1:55 p.m, which is expressly the view from India. All participants and contributors will be joining us from India. And the final panel at 2:25 p.m. Is the role of Third Nations and the diaspora, and we have contributors literally from across the planet to contribute to that. Those are my brief introductory remarks. I will stress that although we have 2 hours allocated to this, we have a lot of speakers and a lot of content to get through. I'd ask all contributors to stick to the maximum 5-minute time limit. And I invite all those other participants to take part and share equally, if you can, the 10 minutes Q&A that will follow each of those panels. We are extremely fortunate today to be joined by my colleague from the Australian Commonwealth Parliament, Senator Janet Rice. Senator Janet Rice has a strong and proven track record of being a outspoken activist, both as a parliamentarian and in her community work, standing up for human rights. She is the Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the Australian Greens in our federal parliament. And I would welcome Senator Rice to the forum and ask if you could kick us off with some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you so much for bringing us all together today, from people, there in person with you in the New South Wales Parliament, people across the country and people around the globe. It's a really fantastic initiative that you've undertaken. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm here on unceded Wurundjeri land in Melbourne, so some almost 1,000 kilometres to the south of Sydney, and acknowledge that all of us who from around Australia are speaking from unceded sovereign lands, and that we're speaking on stolen lands, and we are committing ourselves to be working for truth-telling as to what has gone on with the settler colonialism in this country, for justice and for treaties with our First Nations peoples. I also want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of India, given that we're talking about India today, who also continue to struggle for land, conflict with security forces, and their basic human rights to be living safely and securely, and not be subject to affronts like sexual violence, trafficking, militarisation or state violence. And the struggle for justice for First Nations peoples, it's got strong resonance with the struggle for human rights around the world. And of course, this year, we've seen incredibly significant protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in the US, the protests in Hong Kong, and recently incredible protests in Thailand as well, calling for reform. And all around the world, we are seeing people campaigning and struggling to protect their human rights. And the Australian Greens believe that human rights are fundamental and must be respected for all countries and for all people. And we are working at state and federal levels and at local government levels to see greater international respect for and protection of human rights. Obviously, we're going to be hearing a lot about India today and the range of challenges of human rights in India. And I really want to thank you, David, in bringing us here together so that we can be learning about what's going on in India. And I'm really looking forward to listening and learning a lot from this afternoon. At both state and federal level as Greens, we are really concerned about the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 that was enacted in India, and discrimination on citizenship status based on a person's religion. And this is particularly given India's proud democratic history. And that impact on Muslim communities in particular is also reflected in concerns about what's happening in Kashmir. And as I know we're going to hear more about later on, the constraints on free speech, on people's movements, on access to information and healthcare, and seeing hundreds of thousands of people detained at various times is really disturbing, including 3 former chief ministers and 144 children. And similarly, we are very concerned about what's happened to Amnesty International in India, shutting down bank accounts in response to investigations. It's a really unacceptable attempt to silence critics. And it's not the action of a government that should be fully open to scrutiny. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Amnesty later on this afternoon about how we can support them as they work to hold power to account in India. So the question then becomes, of course, what can we do about it? We're gathered here because we know that there are things that need action. Firstly, I'll start by just briefly outlining what the Australian government can do about it. And then there's a question about our roles as campaigners, as activists and community members. We think that the Australian government can and it must take urgent action to support human rights in India and in other countries, and through international forums in the United Nations, such as the Human Rights Council. The Australian government must be willing to really strongly advocate on behalf of people in countries with poor rights records, and to give honest and open statements about what the situation is on the ground. And the Australian government should support UN-backed investigations into human rights abuses. And whenever we provide assistance in any country, we need to ensure that foreign security, peace and military units that receive Australian support are subject to a full vetting process to make sure that we are not funding units that are associated with human rights abuses. But importantly, the thing I wanted to finish on is what the critical role of us as campaigners, as activists and community members, because there is so much that we can do and it's so important. Talking to politicians around the world, talking to media, to people's local communities, incredibly important steps to take, because your voice is powerful. And together we can really make a real difference to amplify the voices of those whose human rights are under attack and empower people struggling for justice around the world. Obviously for us as MPs, we have a platform that we can use to advocate, but we've got the most impact in our advocacy if it's aligned with community campaigning. So look, once again, thank you, David, for bringing us here today. It's an incredibly important forum that we're going to have, and I'm really excited to listening and learning from the conversations that are going to follow. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Janet. I suppose I should call you Senator Rice in this forum.
Janet's fine.
I really do appreciate your ongoing advocacy and your work there as one of our federal senators. Of course, there is a political context to this discussion. We see an increasingly right-wing regime, the BJP regime, within India. We see the response, the security response that has wrapped around the COVID-19 crisis that's gripped not just India, but countries around the world. We see the continuing concern about human rights abuses for minorities, and this forum is on focusing on those concerns within India. We have the Kashmir issue, and we have it in the context of those deepening relationships that India is seeking to have with liberal democracies like Australia and other liberal democracies around the world, and having these global discussions with a human rights and democratic framework, I think, is essential. I do want to, before I throw to the first panel, and we are blessedly running slightly ahead of schedule. Before I throw to the first panel, I do want to thank the work of the Humanist Project, Varun and others at the Humanist Project. They have been, their hard work has been fundamental in bringing together this panel. I have been deeply impressed by the collaborative, open way in which the Humanist Project has gone about drawing attention to human rights concerns in India, and I particularly want to give credit for the work they've done in bringing forward this panel. With that, I will throw to our first panel. It's discussing the state of play for human rights in India, and I will welcome Dilpreet Taggar, the editor of South Asia Today, to commence that panel. Dilpreet, device on mute. Dilpreet.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Dilpreet. I'm the founder of South Asian Today, which is Australia's first media platform for South Asian women and non-binary people. The Muslim and the Dalit communities particularly have been facing continuous atrocities in India. It's been over a year since the Indian government revoked Kashmir's Article 370, almost a year since protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act that systematically wants to keep the Muslim communities out of India erupted. Only a few months since riots against Muslims escalated in Delhi, and only a few weeks since a Dalit girl's body was cremated by the police in the middle of the night without the family's presence. And this is by no means new. Universities have been attacked, students injured, suspended, shamed, and arrested for raising their voice. And again, Muslim and Dalit students face it worse. In fact, public lynching of minorities is common with minimum or no consequences. It's important to at least start a conversation. And Australia misses that. We don't have many media outlets here that analyze Indian politics and the Indian-Australian relation with a critical eye. In my personal capacity, I often receive hate from the Indian community here, as many of my peers do as well, for talking about human rights violations in India, which why I'm sharing is because it could serve as another indication of how conversations are snubbed before they can make any kind of impact. So it is crucial for us to think how we can keep the relations between the two countries in check, especially as a journalist. And it's really important for me to keep doing independent journalism about South Asia in Australia and particularly India, because we don't really have, again, many journalists focusing on what the future is for minority Australian Indians. In fact, I moved from India primarily because independent journalism in India is becoming harder and harder to do in an environment where media is more and more pandering towards the government rather than keeping an eye on it, which is our first job to do. Journalists like Rana Ayub, for example, are trolled and abused online on a daily basis. So this is why I started South Asian Today. Those were my main reasons. I'll keep this very short and I'll wrap up, and I'm open to more discussion and questions on how we can do this through a media and a journalism lens. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dilpreet, and thank you also for allowing that little bit of extra time at the end with your contribution and for the work you do. It's essential. We really appreciate it. Dr. Vikrant Kishore.
Many thanks, David. Hello all. I'm Dr. Vikrant Kishore, and I'm joining this roundtable as one of the members of South Asians for Inclusiveness. Before I start, I would like to recognize the various traditional lands where we are located and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge the land, waterways, and airways of the Kulin Nation and the Gunditmara people, and pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also pay my respect to all the esteemed guests present here and the audience that are watching this. The fight for basic human rights in many parts of the world is a reality, and my own country of origin is not an exception. While the Indian Constitution is one of the strongest guarantees of basic human rights, yet there is much to achieve, and this is mainly due to the kind of politics, be it at central, state, or local level, and the socio-economic structure that is still very divisive in the name of caste, religion, region, sex, etc. Yesterday only, the opposition party leaders in India gathered together to express solidarity with human rights activists and lawyers who have been arrested in the Elgar Parishad case and charged under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and demanded that the stringent law be repealed. Speaking at this press conference organized by People's Union for Civil Liberties, my home state Jharkhand's Chief Minister, Hemant Soren, claimed that the government was trying to silence the voice of marginalized communities. News 18 reports in a video message, Soren alleged that under the present government, the unity, integrity, and democratic structures were under attack. The NDA government sitting in the center today, it is silencing the voices of those speaking for the Adivasis, the indigenous, Dalits, and other marginalized groups. The non-BJP ruled states are being harassed. Various constitutional mechanisms of our country are being weakened today by different groups and organizations for its own political benefit under a hidden agenda, he claimed. The Wire reports they also urged the public to break the silence on the government's effort to chip away the rights of the people. Well, this is just one of the recent examples, but other than that, the atrocities on activists, students, and religious minorities are constantly going on. What one sees is that the atrocity against the marginalized communities, especially the Dalit and indigenous communities, have become rampant. The worst impact is, of course, on the women of these communities. So if you can recall the Khairlanji lynchings of Dalit in 2006, where 2 women of the family were paraded naked, the Kathua rape case of 8-year-old Asifa in 2018, and now the recent case of horrific gang rape and murder of a 19-year-old young Manisha from Hathras, UP, which Dilpreet also mentioned, is another addition to the long list of many women who have faced extreme violence, rape, and eventually brutally being murdered. The everyday violence that the underprivileged women are going through are much worse, and most of these crimes are not even covered or talked about. The Hathras case is also about the insensitivity of the state machinery, the way Manisha's body was burnt in a rush, without even handing over the body to the family or giving them a chance to perform the traditional last rites. The misinformation, the mishandling, the rumors, the caste and patriarchy machinery out there to whitewash issues like this again and again. Nonetheless, public outrage and the last moment media coverage has seen that Manisha's case received vast exposure, yet the mishandling by the state government has resulted in many questions unanswered, and it also brings to the light their high-handedness and disregard for human rights. While many politicians brazenly peddle hate in the name of religion and caste, and yet get away, a Dalit journalist is incarcerated for months because of his one tweet against the state government. He was given bail just yesterday. The problem remains, the basic rights of the marginalized is always in question, and their rights ready to be suppressed at any point of time. And well, right to protest or to say anything against people in power is becoming more and more challenging, often with disastrous outcome. But remember, this is not only about the cases that are covered by the media or ones that people get to know through activists. It is also about the entrenched everyday violence perpetrated on women, Dalit, indigenous, minorities, and activists. We equivocally demand justice for every victim. We demand safeguard of women and the marginalized from oppression, suppression, and victimization. The issues faced by women and the marginalized is something that should not only be discussed in the Indian perspective, but also within the Indian diaspora in Australia. The rise of family violence within the Indian community or assertion of unabashed high caste identity needs to be questioned. We would certainly like these issues to be given priority and dealt with much care, concern, and promptness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikrant. And of course, the fall in India's status on the World Press Freedom Index has been something that I think all of us have been noticing, that the lack of press freedom within India and the need, therefore, to find forums to have these discussions has just become more imperative as the years have gone on. I'd now welcome Zia Ahmed, the editor of the Australian Muslim Times, who's joining us here from the Jubilee Room in the New South Wales Parliament in Sydney. Zia.
Thank you. First, I would like to acknowledge the land we are sitting and holding this round table, the first people and the leaders, past, present, and future. I actually came to Australia almost half a century ago. You can guess my age from that. But I'm really proud of my heritage, Indian heritage. Proud of the fact that I belong to a country which is diverse, which has been democratic, and which has upholded human rights all the time. Also, I am proud of the fact that India is the largest democracy, and the political consciousness of India is very high. They have brought down governments and they have changed governments through electorate. And also, I'm proud of the fact that the Indian judiciary in the past has got a very good track record. Now, all these things in the last 4 or 5 years have really come down. And that has concerned me a lot. Also, I want to acknowledge the fact that I grew up in Kashmir, had my schooling there in a Australian founded school, which was founded in 1890. And it really pains me to see what is happening in Kashmir, which I feel that is like a paradise on earth. Now, coming to the current situation in India, last Tuesday, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Dr. Bachelet, has shown great concern over the arrest of activists and restrictions on human rights organizations. One of the main reasons she pointed out was the laws concerning with foreign funding, which is depriving many organizations, especially human rights organizations, of basically working for human rights in India. There are also 2 other laws where people are, dissenters are just being arrested under terrorism laws and being termed as anti-nationals, just simply for protesting for their rights. And this is really of high concern. We've got people who have been arrested and put in jails, pregnant women, people elderly people in their 80s, people who are disempowered, who come from the low caste, and especially now we are seeing a large minority, which is considered to be the 2nd largest population of Muslims, 200 million in India, which is just being marginalized. Now, this is all happening as a result of the current BJP government, which is aligned to the Hindu supremacist Hindutva ideology, which at one time only received 2 votes in 1983. But over the last 3 decades, they have actually now come in minority. And this is a really big concern that in a democracy, which is India, we are seeing a supremacist organization controlling such large, vast lives of so many people there. Also, I feel that this government is using the state machinery to undermine dissent, to arrest people, to put them into jails, and basically just to is controlling not only the parliaments, it's also controlling judiciary, the police, as well as the media. So we are totally being monopolized in India, and that is really of great concern. I wish to end here. I think my 5 minutes are almost over. I think a lot of people are raising the same issues, and this was my bit to just contribute towards them. And I must thank David Shoebridge for taking this initiative, and also the Humanism Project for putting this together. And it's really disappointing that the Liberal government is, although they're talking about a lot about human rights in China, but they are completely silent as far as the human rights in India are concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zia. And before I go to the last speaker on this panel and open it up to Q&A, I do want to acknowledge the presence in the forum today of my colleague and the former Green Senator, Lee Rhiannon. I've respected and been a close observer of Senator Rhiannon's work, particularly her work in Kashmir. And I have to say her political guidance has always been important to me in my career as a Greens MP here in Australia. Our final speaker for this panel is Anjem Rafiqi. I've worked with Anjem on the ground here in Sydney with the Kashmiri community. He's an activist with Stand With Kashmir. And Anjem, welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much, David. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we assemble on today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Harun, from the Humanism Project, for getting us together and to start the conversation. You only have two choices. You completely surrender. The other is you fight back. I choose the later. These are the words spoken more recently by Ms. Anuradha Basin, the managing editor of Kashmir Times, the 65-year-old media institution of Jammu and Kashmir. The Jammu and Kashmir administration sealed the Srinagar office of Kashmir Times on Monday, 20th of October, 2020. This comes days after the employees of a wire service, Kashmir News Service, were asked to vacate their offices within the zone known as Press Enclave. Ms. Basin, who filed a petition before the Supreme Court on the media gag last year, has been at the forefront of fighting against the internet ban in J&K and for press freedom after the abrogation of J&K's status on August 5 last year. Ms. Basin calls the shutting down of her office in Srinagar as straight out of the BJP's vendetta playbook to settle scores with those who dare to disagree. You will no doubt hear a lot about how dissent is being crushed in India under the current BJP government. But it's important that we recognize that the visibility, limited as it may be, and the severity of the tools employed to force compliance and crush dissent inside India is quite different to the news blackout and denial of acts of brutal oppression and forced subjugation of the 8 million people inside the Indian colony, also tamely referred to as Indian administered Kashmir. It goes without saying that Kashmir is the world's most militarized zone, with 1 member of the occupation force per every 9 members of the civilian population. The occupation forces enjoy total impunity, with protection extended under the draconian AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Protection Act of 1990, which is also referred to as a tool of state abuse, oppression, and discrimination. Christoph Heinz, the US Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary or Arbitrary Execution, describes the provisions of AFSPA in clear violation of international law. A number of UN treaty bodies have pronounced it to be in violation of the international law as well. The Shoebridge encounter on the 18th of July is a case in point. The much publicized killing of 3 terrorists turned out to be an alleged cold-blooded murder of 3 laborers from Rajouri district. I quote from the Indian media organization, The Print. In the wee hours of 18 July 2020, 3 terrorists were killed in Amshipora village of Shopian by a joint team of 62 Rashtriya Rifles, J&K Police, and the Central Reserve Police. Much was made of this encounter, and the commander of the Rashtriya Rifles personally briefed the press and gave graphic details of the encounter. For long, Shopian has been the hub of terrorism in J&K, and 62 Rashtriya Rifles has been at the forefront to tackle it. More than once, the unit has received the honor of a unit citation from the Chief of Army Staff for its commendable counter-terrorism operations. 3 weeks later, this surgical encounter fell apart when a missing person FIR was lodged by the family. As per media reports, it was in fact a fake encounter. This is an everyday story for the populace of Kashmir. The only difference is, in this case, social media and the ability of the family to bring pressure to bear has exposed this false narrative. What is also amazing is the responsibility of this extrajudicial killing now is being placed on the persons who are believed to be informers of the security forces. The real Kashmir narrative is replete with stories of extrajudicial killings. Deprivation of right to self-determination for all the populace of the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, as embodied in the Article 1 of the Charter of the United Nations, continues to be a black mark on the UN and the UN Human Rights Agency Australia is a member of. When I talk about the populace of the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, I refer to the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Christians, Sikhs, and of course the Muslims. Kashmir has come under grave humanitarian assault, and its people stand now in tremendous need of your help and prayers. Kashmiris are the most unfortunate people of Indian subcontinent, right from the dawn of independence of India on 15th of August. They have been continuously denied their right to self-determination. I end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjum. And I'd like to again thank all four panelists for their contributions. We are now at the point of a Q&A or brief contributions from those who weren't on the panel. And I remind everybody, we will have 3 of these sessions throughout the course of the forum. So not everything has to be said in the first Q&A. And I'll also make this acknowledgement at the beginning. This is a radically democratic Zoom session where everybody is a panelist. And we're going to have some self-policing and tolerance as we work our way through the Q&A. Is there anybody who would like to kick off the Q&A, a question to the panelists or a short contribution? Muskan.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Muskan Verma. I am from India, but I am currently an undergraduate student in the US at Bates College. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the coordinators and founders of an online sort of group movement that we started called South Asian Students Against Fascism during the CAA protests. Unfortunately, with COVID and everything, things kind of became slower. But something I would like to just share with you guys and with you all is I am currently working and researching for my thesis this semester, which I am doing on religious nationalism and the cult-like rhetoric in Indian political narratives. And in my research, I mean, it's not completely done, but I have been looking at how especially this government is using a whole lot of cult-like techniques to get so many people to rally behind them, and then really making religious nationalism into a cult, and how politics has really changed in this current time period, especially the problems with how our media is being used in this, because our media used to be a lot more fierce before this, and now it seems we can't really trust many of our media personnel, and that has just been terrible. But yeah, specifically, I'm also looking at how social media has been used to build narratives. So all the fake Twitter accounts, bots. I have some research that I was able to get my hands on from somebody on the whole BJP IT cell and how it works, and the way these accounts are actually the way these accounts are working in order to spread a lot of misinformation and take over Twitter trends. So I guess thank you so much. And if anybody has any ideas or any research or anything that you would point me towards, I would be so happy to take that and put that out into the academia. So thank you.
Thank you, Muskan. And I sometimes, we look at the world news here from Australia, where for the moment, COVID-19 is fairly under control and we have a fairly safe community. And we look at our friends from around the world, the US and other places, India, and our thoughts are with you at the moment as well. Could I ask people if they want to contribute? The easiest way of making yourself known is you raise your blue hand, and you can do that in the forum at the bottom of the participants thing. Or if you're sitting behind me, you could raise your finger. Yes, I'll go back here. Thanks.
Thank you. So the question was to Anjum, and very often a religious narrative is used to divide the Kashmiri community, between Muslims and Pandits. Is that something you subscribe to, or is that something you see as a divide and rule technique from the political dispensation?
Definitely a divide and rule technique. There's no doubt that in this conflict, members of all communities have suffered, and they have suffered in various degrees. Now, this suffering has been taken by various agencies and weaponized without giving any recourse to justice. I'll cite an example where one of the Pandit community in one of the villages in Kashmir was subject to brutal massacre. And to this day, that investigation has never come to light, and there's no conclusion that has been brought forth. What this breeds mistrust between the community, and that's what the oppressing forces thrive on.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question for Vikrant, if you wouldn't mind. We've got a number of contributors here from the media organisations from within the diaspora. How important are those media organisations to have a forum for talking about the challenges of inclusiveness and standing up for women's rights, minority rights, transgender rights, and the like in India? How important is that, the media within the diaspora?
Thanks, David. I think it's very important. Media, the Indian diaspora media at the moment, unfortunately, it's a toothless media driven by majorly the ad revenues that they generate or they are dependent on. And that's why there are only a handful of people who are actually talking or discussing about something which is relevant to the community. Indian diasporic media needs to come out from festival celebrations or religious celebrations. And that is one of the first and foremost thing that we need to do. It needs to be discussing the issues that surround without any kind of attachment to what they support or what they don't support. So the issue, so aspects of media being, independent, thinking independent, and putting forth those kind of issues which concerns us all, not only about being inclusive, but also how do we respond to the Australian community at a wider level and respond to the Australian society, politics, and how do we see ourselves there. Somehow we have the community still looks at in a very inward fashion, within a kind of a way that the relationship is between Indians and the Indian media. So Indians are always thinking about Indian media, which is not a bad thing. It is always good to be connected to your country, but also we need to be connected to what is happening here, the issues that is happening. And more and more the community is growing, the responsibility of this Indian media and the diaspora is becoming much more important. I would like to, really look forward to have this kind of discussion with the Indian media people. And myself, I have been a media person. I teach media, so worked with Indian media for a long time. So I see, I'm always concerned about these things. So David, I think we definitely need an Indian media kind of roundtable sometime soon to discuss and to position ourselves much more strongly. Because at the moment, the representation is only through SBS Hindi or SBS language, Indian language ones, which is very limiting. We need to move out and we need to be seen and we need to be heard.
Thanks, Vikrant. Well, I might allow Dilpreet or Zia to reflect upon those observations from Vikrant. Dilpreet?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything that Vikrant has said, that we don't have many media outlets in Australia that focus on Indian politics and or talk about things like human rights at all. In fact, I often say it in a manner that we need to move beyond just chai tea. And what I mean by that is we need to move beyond just talking about culture or religion or looking at ourselves as the oppressed minority, but not acknowledging how we can act as oppressors as well. I think that's one storytelling narrative is entirely missing, and that's not seen because there's no one to talk about these things or elevate these voices. So I'm always looking at The Guardian to write about something, or some American newspaper to publish my opinion. I think it's important to have something like that, something something very well based in Australia for me to be able to share my narrative.
Thanks, Dilpreet. Zia, and then I think Janet Rice has a question.
Well, look, I really feel very proud to be working as a journalist in Australia, because this country provides the opportunity to write or express whatever you feel like. I can't even think of performing the way I am performing in Australia in any other country, especially in terms of any Muslim country or even India. Although I'm the editor of Australasia Muslim Times and the headline is Muslim, but it's a very inclusive newspaper. We don't limit ourselves to Muslims only. It's being read by almost everybody. And especially we have been highlighting oppression wherever it is. We have written on First Nation people. We have also written on plight of Rohingyas, in Uyghurs, Palestinians, and without favor or fear. We are a non-profit organization, and is thriving quite well. And I think we are doing quite well. Recently, of course, we have taken up the issue of the Kashmir in the 90s when the issues in Kashmir were happening, especially in recent days. In recent years, we have been concentrating on what is happening in India as well, especially because my background is of Indian origin.
Thank you, Zia. We've got about another 4 minutes. I know Janet's got a question, and I see Ruchira and Vivek also have questions. We'll go to Janet, and if we can get to Ruchira and Vivek, we will do that. But otherwise, we may hold those over to the end of the next panel. Janet?
Thanks. Yes, look, I was interested in the comment about the increasing compliance of the media in India, and I wondered whether there is evidence of the Indian government attempting to influence Indian media in Australia, the diaspora media, the same way that we know the Chinese government do to Chinese language media here.
As far as I'm concerned, I've not seen any evidence of that as yet. It may be doing it in a very subtle way, but overtly, I don't think I've seen any attempt by the Indian government or the Indian diplomatic establishment to influence media here. Yeah.
Well, that's a hopeful response.
It's good to know. Yes.
But it's a watch this space, I think. Ruchira.
Thank you. I'll keep my, I'll take exactly a minute. So just wanted to throw in a couple of things which are quite structural to the change we've seen in India since Modi's come in significantly. I'm at UTS, Faculty of Art and Social Sciences in the Climate Justice Research Center. There are quite a few like us from Australia, India, specifically who have been activists. I've worked in India in environmental organizations, then in Australia, and now I'm finishing my thesis on coal politics in India and Australia. And I look at Adani, in India and Australia, and through that lens, look at human rights and indigenous rights and land rights. So one of the structural changes that have happened is Modi's and Adani's trajectories have, kind of traveled together since Gujarat times, when both the Gujarat model of development was built on the carnage of Muslims, and at the same time, development of remote areas like Mundra, Adani's port. So and that similar project has in some ways translated into kind of India when Modi's come into power. But specifically what has happened is the corporate, the crony capitalism, what we call in India, and the corporate state nexus, and the ground clearing, as it is called, of Adivasis in coal-rich, resource-rich regions, grabbing of forests, grabbing of land, ground clearing of Adivasis, weakening of forest rights, which is equivalent to the Native Title Act. And these are some of the significant ways in which the ground, the resource-rich regions are being changed. And one of the reasons this does not come out strongly in the international space, like in Australia with the discourse on Adani, through the Stop Adani movement, it doesn't come out is because internationally, India is seen as a responsible climate player. So the reason why these transformations on the ground are happening are not easily understood or well talked about. Just wanted to throw that into the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruchira. As a Greens MP, obviously, I was tempted to have an entire panel on coal and coal politics, particularly in light of the proposed Adani coal mine in the Carmichael Basin in Queensland in Australia. But I think we had enough on our plate at the moment. But that coal politics, I think, is a real part of the discussion between India and Australia. Vivek, very briefly, if you wanted to make a brief contribution. Vivek?
Oh, is it for me?
Vivek, did you take your hand down? That's okay. Niraj, you go. Briefly.
I've been in the so-called Indian and South Asian media for the last 18 years in Melbourne. And if I found whenever I raise a serious issue like human rights or the question of refugees or minorities, people just start attacking me and trolling me. And it has been going on for many years. But still, I stood at times alone. And I agree with Vikrant that within the diaspora, issues of class and caste are very much there. And so we might better have a special session in future for this issue. And also, to tell you the truth, Australian politicians ignore the ethnic media also, but not now. For the last 6 months, 7 months, because of the pandemic, things have changed. But we have been ignored, basically. People think the mainstream media is very important. It is important, but the diaspora media goes to the grassroots, and it is here we now have people who are raising fundamental issues like human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Niraj. And I think it's an important observation to politicians that it's a two-way street in terms of engaging positively with the media in the diaspora. I appreciate that. We'll now move on to the second panel, and this panel is entitled The View from India. We have the 4 panelists again, and I ask if each of you could be quite vigilant in keeping to the 5-minute time frame. We have 4 extraordinarily distinguished panelists. Our first is Dr. Colin Gonsalves, and who is a designated senior advocate of the Supreme Court of India, and in fact the founder of the Human Rights Law Network, specialising in human rights protection, labour law and public interest law, was awarded the Right Livelihood Award in 2017 for his tireless and innovative use of public interest litigation over 3 decades to secure fundamental human rights for India's most marginalised and vulnerable citizens. We're very glad to have you, Doctor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, India is no longer the land of Gandhi. We have forgotten Gandhi a long time ago. It's not a land of non-violence. It's not a land of peace. In fact, India could well claim to be a country which has some of the most highest levels of violence in the world, highest levels of violence and discrimination and terrorism of people by the state, with the state as terrorists rather than individuals as terrorists. Starting first of all with malnutrition and the denial of the right to food. India boasted a GDP of 7% hardly a year ago. And today we have 600 million people below the poverty line. 600 million people requiring subsidized food from the state to survive. India has become the hunger capital of the world, with more hungry people in India than the whole of sub-Saharan Africa put together. Moving to the issue of Muslims and the atrocities on Muslims, the attacks on minorities, we start with Assam, where 500,000 Muslims have been identified as foreigners. They may have come 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago. Any other country would have regularized them and made them citizens of their country. So we're talking about an illegal migration that took place in the 70s and 80s. 500,000 of them have been identified. Incarceration centers have been built. And the government is seriously planning, despite the outcry in the country, the government is seriously planning to build more incarceration centers to keep them until deportation. But deportation is impossible because Bangladesh does not admit that they are citizens of Bangladesh. And therefore, what India has effectively done is to create 500,000 stateless people in the country, in contravention to all the international conventions on statelessness and so on. Huge development, because now incarcerations are beginning, arrests are beginning, and that situation is going to exacerbate. Following that came the Jamia attack, when the students came in, that's a very important development in this country. The Jamia students started their agitations. And that was a merciless attack, which all of us in Delhi saw personally. Students with their skulls cracked, students with their hands and legs broken, taken to hospital, police coming into the Jamia library and beating people to pulp. It was levels of barbarism that a democratic country does not often see, and caught on CCTV camera. Following that came the Aligarh attack, similar, opening fire on the students, tear gas in the libraries, tear gas in the hostels of the students. India is at war with its people. There's no way of characterizing what is happening in India than to talk about a civil war. And then, of course, you had the riots in Delhi, instigated by a cabinet minister, prominent activist of a particular party, who said on television again and again, and made it a very popular right-wing chant, "These traitors, desh ke gaddaro ko goli maro salo ko." These traitors, shoot them dead. And the agitators came out and started shooting people and burning their property and so on. Hate speech at the highest possible level. Case pending in the High Court for the last 1.5 years, 2 years. Can you imagine? And the High Court not proceeding. So we have a very, very tricky situation here where the judiciary, which is supposed to protect people, not even beginning the hearing of a case where we have it on video, where we have these prominent persons and cabinet ministers saying, kill the people, and yet no case begins. Tribal evictions on a very large scale. And it's surprising to see some very prominent environmental organization taking the move for the eviction of millions of tribals from the forest areas in which they live. And it took a counterattack by the human rights organizations and the tribal organizations to have that order of the Supreme Court for the eviction to be stayed. And so now we are on tenterhooks wondering whether the court that hears the matter will allow the tribals to be evicted.
That's
labor law.
Dr. Gonsalves, that's 5 minutes if you could wrap up.
Okay, so labor law is another big issue where labor protection is being dismantled, and mining in the areas, the scheduled areas of the tribal, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, is proceeding at a very rapid pace. One last thing, I would like your embassy in India, your embassies in India, to take a proactive stand. Australia has been very quiet for a long time. I don't know why that is, but I think if you were to talk to people in Australia and influence public opinion, Australia could possibly take a more active stand on human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Doctor, and for your work. And I think that's part of the takeaway here for politicians in Australia. Our next speaker is Dr. Ram Punyani, who is a former professor of biomedical engineering, a former senior medical officer affiliated with the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay, an extremely distinguished medical career. And in December 2004, took voluntary retirement to work full-time for what has been stated by some as communal harmony in India. He's involved with human rights activities and initiatives to oppose something which some see as the rising tide of fundamentalism in India. Dr. Punyani.
Thank you very much, friends. I'm very grateful to this Humanism Project for inviting me on this. It has already outlined various areas in which the violence has been going on against the more vulnerable sections of society. One point which I will like to highlight is also that in India, the two big religious minorities, one Muslims, second Christians. So far, our focus has already been more on the anti-Muslim violence. But I'd like to point out that anti-Christian violence has also begun from the decade of 1990s. And the last year's report of Persecution Relief tells us that during last 1 year, the attacks on Christian minorities has gone up by 40%. So what do we see? Attack on religious minorities, attack attacks on Dalits, insecurity of women, to what we have in our constitution as a secular, democratic, plural constitution. The type of society which is coming up is believing more in a sectarian nationalism where they want to go towards Hindu Rashtra. While such a economic deprivation is there, our Prime Minister is going and inaugurating the building of a grand Ram temple. Now, India's tradition has been that of a multiculturalism, pluralism, and a life of harmony and peace. Now, last 30, 40 years, we are seeing that there is an increase in identity-related issues. And these identity-related issues create a mass hysteria, and already a hate has been created against religious minorities, because of which polarization in the society is going up and up. And in these situations, any criticism of the government is labeled as being anti-national. So those people who were never a part of the India's freedom movement or making of Indian constitution or making of Indian values, now they are trying to claim the sole monopoly on the type of nationalism, which I will say Hindu nationalism. Let's distinguish between Hinduism as a religion of tolerance, which Mahatma Gandhi practiced, and Hindutva as a politics, which is sectarian and which is exclusive. So this Hindu nationalism, for that matter, any nationalism in the name of religion, is basically excludes the religious minorities on one side. At the same time, it is also very oppressive to the weaker sections of society. And in Indian context, it is Dalit, women, and Adivasis. So the core point I see is that hate has been manufactured deliberately against these sections of society. Because of this hate which has been manufactured, there is a possibility of orchestrating violence, about which my previous speakers have said. The Delhi violence is one of the recent examples, and the scattered anti-Christian violence is another, and the rising incidence of atrocities against women is a third. So overall, we are dealing with a situation where the concept of rights is being done away with, and what is prevailing is a emotion-led concept of nationalism, which we have to counter. And this particular nationalism, which has been opposing Indian constitution's value, which was nowhere a part of India's freedom movement, which has nowhere contributed to the development of the country, that is dominating the scene. And with that, on one side, we see an economic decline, rise of big corporates, and at the same time, a increasing marginalization of religious minorities and lower sections of society, Dalits and women. So what I suggest, what I appeal, that if we can look at human rights in the context of Indian Constitution, what Indian Constitution provides and how it is being practiced by the present government, that should be important. Because in the practice, by and large, the concept of rights for dissidents, for the weaker sections of society, has been totally been marginalized, has been totally been undermined. And that is an area which is a great concern of hate. Believe me, how can a society thrive and develop if there is so much creation of hate through social media, through dominant media, which we call here sitting in the lap of the government? And earlier, of course, the hate has been created in earlier period also. This hate has become exaggerated during last 30 years in particular. And this, I think, is the foundation because of which the human right violations against religious minorities and other sections of society are going on. So if we want to protect...
That's 5 minutes, Dr. Punyani.
Yeah, the last point. So I think we have to look at this particular aspect also, and that is how hate is dominating the Indian political scenario. I understand unless there is harmony and love, development and peace cannot come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Punyani. Both speakers who have spoken about this internal violence in India and the use of politics and an increasing push of nationalism, deeply troubling. And we're grateful for your perspective. Our next contributor is Dr. Pooja Tripathi, who's the National Convenor of Women's Congress. Dr. Tripathi is a public health expert, an author and a politician. Has a passion for communication and policy formulation, and has worked closely with political leaders with the obvious factor of missing women in politics, translating into a gender gap in policies, which has led her to take a political plunge with the Indian National Congress. Dr. Tripathi is a reconstructive surgeon with an MPH from in fact, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Tripathi.
Thank you so much, and a warm hello to everyone. I'm privileged to speak at this rich and diverse panel. To start with, I come from this village called Gorakhpur in the state of Uttar Pradesh in India, which is one of the most backward and yet very divided regions of the country. And you have heard about Uttar Pradesh for obvious, very wrong reasons in the past. You know, if I take Gorakhpur as a microcosm of what India is today, the right-wing populism, what Muskan also pointed out, the right-wing populism, I believe, gave them a distant dream of an unseen, unknown future where their majority community ruled. The low-hanging of fruits of economic growth were reserved for their community, and they were protected against a minority community, which was a threat. I think this very ignorance was the reason of an absolute majority that we saw right-wing came to power in 2014. So as a young politician, I'll talk about the biggest human rights violations that our country saw in the recent past. Indian government came out with NRC rendering 1.9 million people in Assam nationless. They now have two choices, either to apply to the tribunals or to go to detention centers. Imagine the mere mention of detention center in a multi-ethnic and multi-religious democracy like ours. It should put us to shame. Coming to the caste-based violence, exclusion and dehumanization should have invited a huge outrage, but there's barely a trickle. Every 6 minutes, a Dalit is being attacked in this country. 6 Dalit women are raped every day. And we all know what happened in Hathras. Of all the ghastly images that came out from the Hathras violence, one particular image stayed with me. The sister-in-law of that 19-year-old victim is chasing the district magistrate's official car. You know, it's like an Indian citizen who is guaranteed equality in constitution is chasing India's new bosses, like a supplicant in a feudal autocracy, begging for the most basic human right, dignity in death. Of course, the car doesn't stop. It never stops. We heard the trauma of exclusion of the native Kashmiris. By the stroke of midnight, we attained freedom, and by stroke of a pen, Kashmiris lost there. what happened in Kashmir was the grave violation of every possible human right on the face of the planet. I remember a young Kashmiri writing on internet. When we went into lockdown due to COVID, a young Kashmiri wrote, "I hope the world sees what an everyday life in Kashmir is." Being heartbroken at the irony of statement, we have to remember that we were locked down in our homes with our phones, our internet, our Netflix, banana bread, and of course, human rights. Kashmiri is not. Coming to the migrant workers, we can never let go of this thousands of marginalized people, migrant workers, walking unimaginable distances, dying in between. And absolute apathy from government. There's no social security, there's no support. India was full aware that the millions of these Bharat are running their cities. And when they needed us, when the economic activity stalled, we failed them. We completely denied their existence. And these are the dark morass of these unorganized people which keep the wafer thin crust of upper India shining. And definitely no support, it's as if they don't have any human rights. Coming to CAA, which has been in news for all the wrong reasons. CAA targeting minorities completely tried to erase the secular fabric of India. The brute display of power by police, communalization of dissent led to indiscriminate detentions, arresting human rights activists from a pregnant woman to a 90-year-old, internet shutdowns, FRCA to harass rights, and custodial interrogations of the student leaders who were all the while cooperating with the investigation. Not only this was a complete subversion of our human right of dissent, it also created a deep divide in communities thanks to a biased media and a targeted propaganda. But all the while we are discussing what human rights, violations is happening in the country owing to the rise of right wing, which are deeply and anxious, troubling times for the whole world, I guess. So what will save India, I want to add? I think Gandhi will save India. I find my biggest reason of hope in the citizens itself. The young, restless, the old, new communities, ethnicities coming together to reclaim the constitution. To conclude, I take you to Satyagraha for Times Shaheen Bagh. It was Muslim women emerging in large and determined numbers from their homes and who showed that hijab may hide their faces but not silence their spirit, as pointed out by our honorable PM, that you can identify anti-nationals by their clothes. Fearlessly braving the biting cold, cradling their infants along, going to the protest side, and in their shrill voices echoing the anthem of our times, Hum Dekhenge.
That's 5 minutes.
Okay, I think that's it.
No. I didn't want to stop you, but I'm sorry, we have to move on to the...
I understand, there's a time constraint.
Our final speaker on this panel is Manjula Pradeep, an eminent human rights activist and lawyer. She's the former executive director of the Navsajan Trust and one of the largest Dalit rights organisations in India, and is addressing the issues of caste discrimination and gender-based discrimination. Amongst other qualifications, has a master's in social work from the University of Baroda. Manjula.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very important occasion for all of us to share the concerns of human rights violations in India. I represent the community which is discriminated based on the caste. So I come from the Dalit community. And as you introduced me about the Navsajan Trust, where I served for 25 years, and I'm from Gujarat, the model which is being discussed so much about across the country and also globally. I have worked very closely with the community, and I'm a survivor of violence, sexual violence and discrimination. When we talk about issues of human rights violations, I think it's very important to recognize that how do the 20 million people in India, how do they are surviving during the pandemic, and what kind of discrimination they are facing and violence as well. So when the terminology which everybody uses in India about social distancing, for us it is something which is more a physical distance which the community is already going through since the origin of the caste system. So during the pandemic, I have myself worked with not only with the Dalit communities, but also with the other migrant laborers. And we set up a helpline where we try to help them as much as possible across the country, providing them support in terms of collaborating with other organizations in different parts of the country. It was a difficult time for all of us, especially between April to June. And I think that was significantly not seen as something which has to come out also in the media, and not much was reported, and those which have been reported already has been shared. I'm just concerned about how do we look into the laws which are there to prevent atrocities on Dalits and Adivasis in India. And I just want to share about where is the amended act which was enacted, amended in 2015, where we have the Prevention of Atrocities Act, and where are we in terms of the 5 years of the amendment into this act. And we don't see much hope in it. We still have the issues of impunity, state impunity. The conviction rate is very low. It's around 30%. And as I was looking at the NCRB data of last year, and it says around 62,000 cases of atrocities are pending for investigation. This is a very big figure. And also that the increase of atrocities against scheduled castes, the Dalits, have increased by 7%. We all are discussing so much on the issue of Hathras, and that's not the first incident which has happened. And I've worked very closely with the sexual violence survivors in specifically in Gujarat and some other states like Haryana and Uttar Pradesh. I come from Uttar Pradesh, born in Gujarat, and so I know the hostility of the state. And I have seen and I have also seen the pain and the plight and the trauma of the victims with whom we work very closely. The point of hope is with the law. So as I said about the Atrocity Act, I think there's a need to relook into where is the law and why the implementation is so weak. With regard to crimes against women in India, there's an increase from 2018 to 2019, almost of 7%. I think that is something to be also to be think about. I just want to talk about a right-wing leader from the BJP party from Uttar Pradesh, and who is very active on the Twitter, and how he is spreading the hate speech about where he himself is implicated in 44 criminal cases, and he's putting a shocking video statement saying that the 19-year-old Dalit girl in Hathras was a wayward, she was an avara, and she must be, because of her loose character, she must have invited the boy to the field, the main accused, and she was having an affair. And then he said that such women are found dead in few specific spots, such as sugarcane, corn, and millet fields, or in bushes, gutters, or forests. Now, this kind of hate speech, what is it? It's propagating in India, and it's happening like the social media is a platform which is used more now because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. So I think there is some, there has to be some control on this kind of hate speeches, which is spreading through the social media, which is because it's affecting the individual and community. And it's also forcing or making them take serious steps. And there have been situations where there is a possibility of more atrocities and crimes to be committed on the most marginalized communities in India, whether it's Dalits or Adivasis or Muslims. I just want to also raise the issue of other acts which are there in place since few years. Like there is a entire issue of manual scavenging, the most inhuman practice which is going on, existing in the world, which is the cleaning of human excrements with bare hands. I have worked a lot on this issue, and I'm just worried about what changes have happened to when the new law which was enacted in 2013, has it able to eradicate the problem? Because at one side India is boasting about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the total clean India, and then the other side we have seen lots and lots of Dalit community men dying in the manholes and then there is even during the pandemic there have been deaths, and which are reported as accidental deaths. There is no in terms of implication, in terms of strict action or legal action against the perpetrators. I think this is something to think about. That
is 5 minutes, I'm sorry, so over. And indeed, the scope of work that you're doing, we have very deep respect for it, for the work you do. We have a very short amount of Q&A. A number of our speakers did just sort of tick over the time, the 5 minute allocation. Vivek Kumar, you have your hand raised again, the second time, so therefore you get priority.
Thank you, David. And my question is to Dr. Gonsalves and Professor Punyani. So we have seen so many controversial and oppressing decisions and actions by the government of India recently, in last 6 years, in fact, and people have expressed their anger. They have been opposing these decisions on roads and on various platforms. However, nothing has been much influential in terms of results. We haven't seen any results, and the government remains as obstinate as it gets. So is it due to a wider acceptance of its ideology by the Indian society as a whole? And if yes, then how to fight with this acceptance? I mean, you can fight with the state, but how can you fight the public?
Dr.
Ram, go ahead, Ram.
Yeah, see, I think this is a very crucial question which we have been facing in our country. Now, on one side, all the critics of the government are being demonized by being called anti-national. And secondly, of course, as a previous speaker pointed out, we saw one of the best, most democratic and good movement in the form of Shaheen Bagh. Now, of course, that has also been demonized. I see in India that there is a good deal of different social movements. But point is that the coordination between these social movements is not very good. And that's why there are so many social activists and leaders of social thought who are trying to articulate their dissatisfaction. But a need for broad-based platform where all those believing in secularism, democracy, pluralism, diversity, and a concept of human rights, they somehow have not been able to come together and exercise their opposition to the present regime, number one. Number two, I pointed out about the hate, rising hate. And I think this hate which has been created against human rights activists, religious minorities, that is, I think, something very, very damaging. And this hate has not been combated by people like us in an effective way. So these two things I feel very crucial in combating such a regime, which is now in total control of so many things at so many levels. Over to Colin.
No, that's fine, Ram.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. We have a question from former Senator Lee Rhiannon. Lee.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks very much to the panelists. It's really been excellent. But my question does go to the supporters of Kashmir, people who are standing up for the Dalits, and you've run through so many issues, the enormity of it. But how do we do that when there's so many issues? Like, was the battle against apartheid, and there was a simple demand there to end apartheid. But we have so many issues here. Do we have an overarching demand? And maybe we can't work it out now. And a lot of it obviously goes to the BJP party. It's a disaster for India, but it seems so much more than that. Does it go to the caste system? Should we be building up a global voice around the caste system? So my thanks is emphasised, but how do we come together on an enormity of issues that, and we're not asking nobody, we can't ask people to stop working on their issue and work on another issue, but is there something overarching that would address so much of what we're talking about?
Manjula, did you want to go first?
I think I fully agree with what you said. How can we make the issue of caste as a global problem? We already have been addressing this problem at the international level. We have raised the issue of discrimination based on caste since 2001 during the World Conference Against Racism, which was held in Durban. We have been putting this into the, we are trying to open the eyes of the UN and the several mechanisms which are there at the international fora. But the problem, the challenge which comes up with from our own government, because India has the largest population of scheduled caste, the Dalits globally. So they are the ones who are denying. They're saying this is an internal problem. And so it cannot be seen as a global problem. So that is the major challenge which we are facing. And so I would request that how do we raise this issue globally and internationally, where the international mechanisms are being followed and there is a monitoring which is done from the international agencies looking at the human rights violations in India, and specifically for the Dalits who face the most brutal forms of atrocities and violence and discrimination and we still have hundreds of untouchability practices still going on in the country. So I just want to raise that issue also, that how do we work on it globally? We do need experts and also international interventions to raise this issue with our own country governments. And the right-wing party is not ready to listen to us. And they're curbing all the voices which we have been raising. I do know how I was protesting with the 3 Dalit families on the issue of police atrocities, where their sons were killed by the Gujarat police in a town called Sangad and at the state capital. And then we were labeled as anti-national in 2016. And then our FCRA license, which is to receive foreign contribution, was cancelled. And the Home Ministry told us that we can't do the work which we are doing for like 3 decades. So this is, I just want to raise those issues also, that we take so much of risk, we take so much of, we receive so much of threat. Despite that, we want to do this work because we believe that we are the citizens of this country and we have the right to protest. And I think the right to protest is also somewhere we don't see that protest now happening, because we all were detained last year when we were supporting the CA protest. And I do know what happened in Gujarat. So I just want to say that I am seeing the Gujarat model since I am in this field since 1992, when the Babri Masjid was demolished and the Surat riots happened. And I've seen the growth of fascism within our own state, and how the civil society don't want to talk about it also. Let me tell you very frankly, there are very few activists from the civil society, from the human rights movement, who really are talking about these issues which we are addressing today at this roundtable.
Thank you, Manjula. Dr. Tripathi, did you have anything you could briefly say in response, Dr. Tripathi?
Then you can speak, you know.
Dr. Tripathi. Oh, sorry. Well, I'll go to you, Devender, very briefly, and then we have to start the next panel. Devender, I think you're on mute, so we'll just get you unmuted.
Is there a question? Like,
Dr. Tripathi, we have just got a very short amount of time. The question from Senator Rhiannon was, is there a unifying call so as can bring all these different issues, all facing the same repression from our sort of right-wing state? Is there a unifying call that can bring these various elements together in a collective reform agenda?
I think as Professor Punyani pointed out, there has to be a common platform for all civil right groups. You know, because the brute majority that the right-wing party here, led by Mr. Narendra Modi, enjoys, the opposition strength in parliament is too less, even to stall something as fundamental as a farmer's bill or upholding the human rights. So civil rights would, as I pointed out in my speech also, civil rights would be the key to reclaim the idea of India that we believe in, a common platform led by political leaders too.
I'm now going to go on to our next panel. And Dr. Tripathi, if there may be an opportunity to contribute right at the end. Sorry, but we are running short of time. We do have the next 4 panelists to speak. This is on the role of Third Nations and the diaspora. And we have, again, 4 speakers who I am extremely grateful are contributing their time. Our first speaker is Matika Anand, an activist who's actually coming to us from Chicago in the United States. And Matika, given we're running so short on time, I will just simply throw to you now and ask you to share your contribution with the roundtable.
Hello, everybody. It's a good evening here, but good afternoon to you people in Australia, and good morning to everyone in India. I'm very happy to be amongst all of you, really happy to listen to all the information that is being shared at the international platform. It is so essential at this time that we speak and inform everybody of, unfortunately, the Nazi dictatorship that has taken over India. This regime is really a birth child of Nazism, the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And the incumbent Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, is actually a child who was literally raised in RSS organization. The entire philosophy of theirs is us being superior versus you, the others who are inferior to us in every way. One superior race and all that phenomena that we unfortunately saw in the 30s and 40s is being reincarnated in India. For past 8 years, I have been working against corruption, etc., from Chicago in India. And there are some things I have understood very clearly. It is extremely difficult for us NRIs, non-resident Indians, to actually do something very effectively on ground. And what I would like to do are a couple of things. One is definitely go after HSS, the international branch of RSS. They are so strong. They have infiltrated every single political office around the world in every country. We have BJP USA so strong that right now, Justice Department finally went after them and they were forced to register under FARA. That means that till now they were entering every single Democrat, Republican, any elected office, and they would contribute donations to the political parties without declaring it to the government. Now they have to, every time they meet any elected representative, they have to inform them. Every time they donate any money, they have to inform how much money went to whoever. They have been fielding their own candidates, the right-wingers, the Islamophobes, you name it, and they have supported these people like crazy in America. And these people have not just affected people here in US, every single office. Australia knows how you are fighting against Carmichael Project. These people have spread their tentacles all around the world. Hitler did wage war outside with weapons. Their weapon are you people, the senators. This is how they are influencing every single country, getting Islamophobic people, getting all the people who are going to give them more power into power in your countries. And as an NRI, I would request all NRIs to find out organizations. They might not be HSS organizations directly. They are fringe organizations, whatever names they have, by whatever name they are functioning, find out who they are. They come as people of religion of peace, but they have so much faith in violence. Another thing I would like to tell the NRIs, you all are doing a phenomenal job, but we also understand that we are so safe here, so unlike every single person who is from India right now, right here. So many of you are under danger and you are doing such a brave job, but we are relatively safe. And what we can do is extract information, put pressure on India, not just only by keeping an eye on who is affecting our local politician, who is influencing them, but also use RTI. I will share in the chat the RTI link, how you can buy EIPOs through which you can file RTIs. Be informed, so well informed, and then spread the truth when your RTI is denied, and it will be denied for sure. When your RTI is denied, let people know that the government is not transparent, it is not accountable to people. The PM Cares Fund, for example, thousands and thousands of crores, that is millions of US dollars in PM Cares Fund in the name of COVID. However, nobody knows exactly how much fund is there and how much is being distributed amongst people. The gentleman, Devendra Jain, who was here, who was trying to speak that people are, I think my 5 minutes are up. But yeah, let's be informed and let's spread the truth. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Motika. And you know, acknowledging the asymmetry and risk between those within India and those in the diaspora, I think is an important acknowledgement. Our next speaker is Sunita Sanghavi, Indian-born. Sunita studied physics in India and Germany, worked as a scientist in the Netherlands and the United States for some 15 years. Her activism, she says in her own modest statement, results from her modest but constant personal engagement with the underprivileged. Sunita, thank you for joining us. and I'll throw it to you now. We've got Senator on. I saw.
Okay, so it is, I unmuted myself. So I'll start.
Suniti, I'm so sorry, Suniti. Yeah.
Is it okay if I start?
Go now.
Yes. So it is an inescapable fact for any member of the Indian diaspora that our well-being depends intimately on the willingness of our host nations to welcome us into our societies, regardless of the color of our skin or the gods we choose to pray to. It is a blessing in disguise that our increasingly diverse societies bring our common humanity to the fore while shedding the narrow clannishness that divides us. India, long a beacon of pluralism, has since the election of Narendra Modi in 2014 followed a clearly authoritarian Hindu supremacist path. Following the fascist ideology of their founding fathers, the BJP strives to make India a nation dominated by upper caste Hindu males, with everyone else relegated to second-class status. Most alarmingly, India's Muslim minority has been singled out for the most insidious state-sponsored persecution in our post-independence history. Following a first term in government marked by periodic lynchings of Muslims by cow vigilantes and an atmosphere of dehumanizing hate, Modi's second term started with a hasty introduction of the unconstitutional Citizenship Amendment Act, which in tandem with the National Register of Citizens serves to disenfranchise millions of Muslims and poor people in India. The passage of the CAA saw massive and vocal peaceful protests by people of Indian origin all over the world. Diasporic activism has led to at least 4 resolutions against the CAA in the European Parliament and in 6 city councils in the United States. In Australia, Member of Parliament David Shoebridge has helpfully tabled a motion against the CAA calling for a review of trade ties with India. I belong to a group in Los Angeles called Voices Against Fascism in India. On February the 25th, we struggled to make sense of the communal violence against Muslims unfolding back in India in Northeast Delhi. Our indignation at the overt complicity of the BJP in the meaningless death and destruction reminiscent of the barbaric 2002 Gujarat massacre gave birth to an online chain fasting protest that has now clocked over 240 consecutive days and grown to include over 30 fasters all over the world, including Australia. The rules of chain fasting are simple but demanding. Fasters go without food for 5 days straight, consuming only water and some honey in order to remain functional as we go about our day-to-day activities. Every day of our fast, we post a message of protest on social media, drawing attention to issues of the faster's choice. Some people ask, what use is it? What do we achieve by our fasting? Well, on the rawest level, it is this. Our fasting gives us a means to virtually sit with those who are scared. Scared because they are hungry, scared because they are tired, because they feel no one in the world cares for them. The Modi government has left no doubts about its inability to care after the arbitrary clampdown in Kashmir, the vicious Northeast Delhi pogrom, the callous abandonment of the nation's poor during its coronavirus lockdown, and the unabated intimidation, harassment, and prosecution of everyone it considers undesirable, mainly Muslims, Dalits, and dissidents. At this critical point in history, the shelter we may seek in silence is delusional. Bullies have hijacked the dominant social narrative in India. Our online fasting protest, unhindered by the physical limits of social distancing, has serendipitously become a means to disrupt that narrative of hate. When we fast, we are creating a space of unsullied love and hope. Our message of peace is a natural community builder that deters the bully's voice with the innate power of gentle truthfulness. These are tumultuous times, but they promise to usher a turning point in the way our world lives as one. I would like to use this opportunity to ask every member of parliament seated here to ally with us and in the spirit of Alfred Tennyson, to help wring out false pride and in place and blood, and ring in the love of truth and the common good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Suniti. You can hear the bells going. I'm sorry, it is a working parliament today. That's a 15-minute time frame when I have to be back in the chamber. So as soon as I make this brief contribution, we'll put this room back on mute, and we will. And Suniti, I think the concept of that gentleness and persistence and resistance is extremely powerful. Thank you. Our next speaker, actually, I might go to Iqbal and then come back to you, Joel, given the, perfect. Our next speaker is Joel Clark. Of all the organisations that we've heard from today, Amnesty International, with its various national branches, is one of those organisations that links civil rights campaigns around the planet. That's why I think we're very grateful to have Joel Clark here from Amnesty International. I've seen Joel's work on Indigenous rights. He's a lawyer by training, an activist by inclination, and we're lucky to have him here today.
Thank you very much, David. And I'd like to begin as well by acknowledging that we're meeting today on stolen land and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all coming from today. Amnesty International Australia's work on human rights in India is grounded in the very strong belief that the Australian government and other third nations have an important role to play in monitoring and addressing human rights violations in India. The Quad Security Dialogue and the Malabar exercises are recent examples of the relationship between Australia and India becoming closer. The strengthening of the relationship provides a good relationship for Australia to keep check of human rights in India. Amnesty International is concerned that the federal government has not yet taken advantage of this strengthened relationship to shine a light on human rights violations. We call on Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Foreign Minister Maurice Payne, and other ministers to stand up and speak out to prove that diplomacy isn't just about trade and security, but about promoting human rights and holding each other to account for the way they treat their citizens. In August, Amnesty International released a report which was a situation update and analysis on the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. This was 1 year after the abrogation of Article 370 and the change of the status of the region. This report, as we know, is one of a countless number of reports from many human rights organisations calling out the blatant human rights violations in the region. Our report called on the government of India to immediately release all political leaders, journalists and activists from detention, restore 4G mobile internet, decongest prisons and launch a prompt and independent investigation into the attacks on journalists in J&K. Importantly, we made it clear to the international community that third countries also have a responsibility to use this information to better human rights by backing our calls on the Indian government to act. As we all know, Foreign Minister Maurice Payne has mostly been quiet on Jammu and Kashmir. The government of India has been systematically dismantling all avenues for justice for the people of J&K, with zero representation, protracted internet restrictions, arbitrary use of some of India's most stringent laws, verbal orders of detention, and the crippling of the local media, things that we've all spoken about today. It's been more than 14 months because of these reforms since we have heard the people of Jammu and Kashmir speak. We are calling on Minister Payne to be a loud and influential voice for the people of Jammu and Kashmir who have been silenced. There are endless examples of when Australia should have spoken out on human rights violations in India. We produced another report this year on the New Delhi riots. We forensically detailed examples of Delhi police officers indulging in violence with rioters, torturing in custody, using excessive force on protesters, dismantling protest sites used by peaceful protesters, and being mute bystanders as rioters wreaked havoc. The global community had the information, but again have largely been quiet. Amnesty International are also calling on third nations to use the upcoming opportunity in the Universal Periodic Review at the United Nations to record these human rights violations that the Indian government has done. Another example of the Indian government eliminating voices of the dissent hits much closer to home. My colleagues from the Indian section of Amnesty International were due to be with us here today. Unfortunately, the work of Amnesty India has recently been shut down, shortly after the publication of its J&K report and also its report on the riots. In September, Amnesty International India came to know that all its bank accounts were completely frozen by the Enforcement Directorate. Our directors and management were interrogated, and most of the work has now come to a grinding halt. This isn't the first time Amnesty International India has been targeted by the government. They've been subject to similar freezings, office raids, and interviews in recent years. This time, however, it is clearly a punishment for the reports that they produce, and the reaction of the authorities has been much harsher. We have called on Foreign Minister Payne and High Commissioner O'Farrell to raise this with their counterparts. We are yet to have a response from the office. This might sound, I'll finish up there, but my last point was, this might sound like just a list of violations and that there is no hope. But what Amnesty International is dedicated and committed to doing is also mobilizing thousands of supporters, millions of supporters around the world to get their governments to act on these violations.
Thank you, Joel. The thought of a country that prides itself on being the world's largest democracy, freezing the assets and shutting down the work of Amnesty International should send a chilling message to those of us around the rest of the planet. Our final speaker is Iqbal Dar, again from Jammu Kashmir, Australia. Iqbal is in Melbourne, some 1,000 kilometres south of us. Iqbal, the floor is yours, and that'll be the final speaker on this panel.
Thank you very much, David. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the people on whose land I stand, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present, and future. I am speaking today as a Kashmiri, as a normal citizen of both Australia, and sort of as someone who never saw himself as an activist, someone who really was forced to come into this area, seeing so many injustices occur, in my homeland. So first of all, I would just like to reiterate what's been said today. The India of today is unlike the India of the 1990s, of the 1980s. This is not the India of Nehru and Gandhi. This is the India of the RSS, the India of Hindu nationalism, and all the sort of discrimination and atrocities that comes with that. So I would like to speak a bit about Standard Kashmir before I get into the actual situation that is on the ground. So Standard Kashmir was formed after the revocation of Article 370 on the 5th of August 2019, and with it, the State Assembly was dissolved, and essentially the autonomy of the state of Jammu and Kashmir was taken away. And so people from around the world, Kashmiris from around Australia came together and founded Standard Kashmir. And we primarily sort of garner support against the illegal revocation of Article 370. We lobbied with politicians. And I should say here that sort of resonating the point that was raised earlier about sort of the influence that the Hindu nationalists have in pretty much every country around the world. The politicians that we've engaged with have actually stepped back. I'm not going to obviously specify them, but we face immense difficulty in sort of retaining support of politicians. This particular individual was called out by RSS social media cells and chose to sort of disassociate himself with our organization. So that is a huge problem and just speaks to what was said earlier. So our ultimate goal is to reinstate the special status of Kashmir with the ultimate goal of ensuring the Kashmiri's right to self-determination. Now, the situation in Kashmir on the ground is it's essentially a living prison. So it's the most militarized region in the world, as was pointed out earlier. There's an ongoing curfew, which means that trade, sort of basic necessities are sort of hard to come by for people on the ground. There's internet network blockades, which impedes sort of the voice of many Kashmiris on the ground. And the way things are headed going forward is we anticipate that the Indian government is trying to change also the demographics of the region by revoking the domicile laws that have existed in India for many indigenous people, and sort of by revocating those laws, they're creating Hindu colonies that would then change the demographics of Jammu and Kashmir, ultimately rendering it a majority Hindu state. I should also point out that similar laws exist in other states in India. This for the protection of indigenous people, for example, in Himachal Pradesh and Nagaland. This is the fact that this law is revoked in Kashmir really tells us, the blatant discrimination that's going on against Muslims in India. That's it for me, I would say, but I also wanted to sort of reinforce the point about social media, that the fact that the BJP government has effective IT cells operating around the world that really play, I think, a huge role in spreading not only hate speech, but sort of muting the voices of so many like-minded Indians around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Iqbal. We have hit the time. This forum is due to conclude. This chamber is going to very soon fill with very loud bells calling the chamber back, the Legislative Council back into session. I will briefly throw to Abbas, who's just behind me, for maybe a final question and or contribution. Abbas.
Thank you very much. Somebody has mentioned actually on the chat, how do we really, international community can be behind us. So there are a number of events. One of the organizations in Australia and Sydney. Is there anything I'll pass on to David and also to Lee, which are on these topics. So my question is very brief actually on the topic which Dr. Gonsalves mentioned, about 600 million people in India undernourished and underlow. And I want to ask a question to David as well as our senator that India has.
That's okay. I'll ask the question. I'll throw it to Janet.
Okay. All right.
What's the question?
Okay. The question is that Australia is supplying defense equipment to India and Pakistan both. Same equipment. Yeah. This is used for spying the both the countries to each other. What our Senate should do that putting up this sort of equipment on hold and not to supply to these both countries which are creating the wars.
Thank you, Abbas. You can hear the bells going off here. I'm sorry, that's calling me back to my workplace, my very dysfunctional workplace. But I might throw then to Senator Janet Rice to address that question about Australia's role in terms of arms exports. And Senator, if you could close this out with some finishing remarks. Senator Rice.
Thank you, David. And yes, difficult circumstances when you've got bells ringing like that. I think that absolutely the Australian government has a lot that we can do. I mean, if we are exporting arms to regimes which are absolutely violating human rights, well, then there needs to be a lot done about it, and the Australian people need to speak up. And I think this forum today has just shown the opportunities, I think, of the challenges, but the opportunities of us speaking up and really seeing these issues as global issues. And any human rights abuses anywhere in the world, people need to be concerned about. We're all one shared humanity. And so certainly for us as Greens politicians, we're going to be sort of working really strongly to be addressing issues of human rights and pushing to get our government to be raising its voice to to try and get the Australian government working in concert with other countries to be trying to get some action on human rights in India. Today's session I have found incredibly powerful, hearing all of these voices from India and from around the world. And it's really actually given me hope of the ability that we can obviously be working much more effectively together. And as powerful voices, both as the Indian diaspora around the world, but anybody who is concerned about human rights in India, but globally as well, to be effectively working together. So I think this forum today that David and the Humanism Project have organised, I really see as being a beginning, that we've got an opportunity to go on from here. I think probably let's work out whether we can have a broader forum, and I think actually make it intentionally global, intentionally bringing people together who are working on these issues across the world. We've spoke about the need to, in India to have a platform so that everyone working on all of these various issues can work effectively together. I think if we could, there's the opportunity to get such a platform operating globally. And I see today's forum as being a really powerful contribution to sort of starting the conversation going about that. So look, I really look forward to continuing to work with all of you. As I know, David in the New South Wales Parliament has done so much work up until now. And yeah, let's continue the conversation and keep on working for justice, because it's such an important thing to do. So thank you all for coming and for being present at this forum, and let's keep on working until we get justice and rights for people right across India and indeed right across the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll end it there.